I don't got it yet. Oh, I just pushed that. Do you guys have any recording little thing? There we go. Okay, that way I know we're on. Okay, so if there is no other questions or anything, we'll let Joelle Sheck and Mike Hutt take the lead here.
Thank you very much, Shayla. I was going to say probably the only questions in the immediate future are going to be from me to make sure I am sharing the screen properly. So I'm going to initiate sharing, and I'm going to put this into presentation mode.
Yeah, looking good so far. We saw a flash up.
Oh, no.
No.
Okay, hold on.
There we go. There we go. Hold on. This looks good.
You can see the presentation?
We can. Yeah, we see the title page and no notes and nothing on the side. So it looks good for on our side.
Right. Excellent. Okay, thanks. Thanks for that introduction, Shayla. I think I actually recognized a whole bunch of names, so that's great. Thanks for joining today. My name is Joelle Sheck. I'm the Northeast Caribou Team Lead with the Ministry of Forest Lands, Natural Resource Operations and Rural Development. I'm part of the Northeast Regional Operations Team, but I'm also part of the Provincial Caribou Recovery Program. And I have been in this current position for the last 3 years, but I've been working for the ministry, or well, for the province since 2001, and have worked in various positions over the years. Today, Michael Huck and I are going to be presenting basically a Caribou 101. So we are going to be providing basically an overview of the program, and Michael is going to, who's a land and resource specialist with the Northeast Caribou team, will be presenting some specifics on some of our regional caribou herds. And just in the very short term here, Shayla, I just need to do something. Having a little bit of issue.
All right.
Just hold on.
I'll let you know if it advances.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
I'm not. Okay, this is okay. So just a quick outline for this morning's presentation. No, I'm just going to try and ignore all the notifications here that are popping up. So, here's a quick outline of what we're going to be covering this morning. We're going to talk a little bit about caribou in British Columbia, why caribou are important, their status and classification, as well as the drivers, the primary drivers that are contributing to their decline. We're going to provide an overview of the Caribou Recovery Program. We'll talk a little bit about the priorities and commitments of the program and give sort of a high-level overview of the management actions that the program is considering around caribou management in BC. And Michael will be presenting caribou in the Northeast LRMP update area. There we go. Okay, so you might be wondering to yourself why caribou in BC are important enough to deserve their own recovery program. Well, there are a number of notable things that contribute to the importance of caribou in BC, including both their federal and provincial designations. Federally, a number of the herds in BC are considered threatened, and both the boreal and southern group of southern mountain caribou and the central group of southern mountain caribou are red listed in BC. So their designations are definitely one of the driving factors behind their importance to the province. As well, caribou management is one of the wicked problems of our time. This is a species that requires large tracts of contiguous intact habitat, mature forest, old forest, and they are extremely vulnerable to predation, particularly by wolves and cougars. As well, they're very sensitive to human disturbance. Just hold on for a moment. So as well, and last but not least, caribou have really significant value to many of our Indigenous nations in the province from both a cultural perspective as well as a treaty or Indigenous rights perspective. So caribou in BC, this is just a quick 101 on how they're classified and a brief overview of their status. So all caribou in BC are considered woodland caribou, and woodland caribou occur right across Canada. Boreal caribou, which is a type of woodland caribou that occur throughout the boreal forests of Canada, prefer large contiguous patches of black spruce and peatland bogs. And so on your map that you can see on this slide, it's the light green areas in the upper northeast within our region that represent our boreal caribou herds, and correspondingly in the table on the side here, you can see boreal caribou are listed as threatened by under the Species at Risk Act. They're on Schedule 1, and they are down significantly in terms of numbers from the early 2000s. We're sitting just a little bit below 600 or 700 animals these days. So we also have southern mountain caribou, which is all of the herds that are within this dark gray outline area, everything sort of within that. And southern mountain caribou are broken into 3 distinct units. We have the southern group of southern mountain caribou that is in purple. These are your deep snow caribou that have had significant declines over the last 50 years. And we have actually some of these herds are now considered extirpated. We also have the central group of southern mountain caribou. These are the orangey red herds. These are in the South Peace, largely in the South Peace, with the exception of Kennedy Siding, which is largely in our Omanika region. And then we have the northern group of southern mountain caribou, and those are the blue herds that are within the dark gray outline. Central group caribou are also considered threatened under Schedule 1 of the Species at Risk Act. And they're also red listed provincially, as are the southern group. And then our northern group of southern mountain caribou are blue listed or special concern herds. And then we have our northern mountain caribou, which are north of the gray outline. And these herds are identified as special concern. So now that you have an understanding of the current status of caribou in BC and some of their needs, it's important to understand what's behind their declining numbers across many of our herds in the province. In a nutshell, the ultimate factor in caribou decline is related to changes on the landscape or habitat alteration, both a combination of human-caused or anthropogenic changes, as well as natural disturbance. So we refer a lot to wildfire, but it could be other types of natural disturbance as well, including pests. So this graphic that you see in front of you is it's actually a boreal caribou graphic that shows a typical boreal caribou landscape in the Northeast BC, where we have the influence of wildfire. We also have had some forest harvesting historically and in the current tense as well. And we've also had a fair amount of petroleum and natural gas exploration and development. So we have these developments occurring on the landscape, and we have exploratory disturbance caused by, for example, 3D seismic programs. And all of this is overlapping caribou habitat or directly adjacent to arboreal caribou habitat. And so what's happened over time is, as we have cut down the forests for forest harvesting, or we've had these wildfires occur, we have created a change in from mature old forests to early cereal or young forests that often are more attractive for ungulates such as moose or deer. And as the moose and deer move into these habitats where there's suitable forage in these young forests, their predators, wolves, follow them into these areas. And so as the moose and wolves move in, there's more interactions with caribou and more predation on caribou. Caribou being a very sensitive species, have difficulty rebounding from these predation events, and we've seen their population numbers decline dramatically. So many of you will have already heard a lot of this spiel about British Columbia's Caribou Recovery Program, but it does bear repeating. In 2017, the province committed $47 million over 5 years to develop and implement a caribou recovery program. The Caribou Recovery Program is a long-term commitment that includes all of BC's caribou herds in a comprehensive, coordinated, and uniform approach to conservation. So, we're in this last year of the first 5 years of this commitment, and we do have confirmation that this program will carry on. It is recognized as its own program and will continue to see funding for the foreseeable future. We have had indication that that the program will continue. So that's good news. And then, one of the, I'll talk about this a little later, but, one of the drivers here too is around developing a really comprehensive and coordinated program that was kind of a centralized program with regional operations delivering on a lot of the actions. The program really has a strong foundation on science and Indigenous knowledge, and science, as a really strong driver to inform those management actions over time. We also have a strong foundation on collaboration and partnerships because, this is such a large job, and, and this is, a complex landscape all across BC that we're working in. This isn't something that 45 people working for the provincial government can do on their own. It requires a lot of collaboration across and partnership development with Indigenous nations, but as well with other stakeholders and the public, local governments. There's no one entity that can do all of this alone. And, this is the type of wicked problem that really requires a lot of cross-organization teamwork. So again, the direction in 2017 was to develop an enhanced Provincial Caribou Recovery Program in time to influence Canada's SARA decision. And so, the underlying factor here that influenced the decision to build and implement an entirely new program aimed at recovering our caribou was, at the time, Canada was on the receiving end of, a lot of requests to act across all the jurisdictions in Canada where, the provincial jurisdictions and territorial jurisdictions were maybe not quite meeting our end of the requirements for for meeting the SARA requirements. And so Canada in turn was putting some pressure on BC. There was a threat, and there still is a threat or a risk of a SARA Section 80 emergency order, which effectively could either partially or fully remove the province's control over our own jurisdiction on Crown land. And so this was the approach that BC wanted to take to help mitigate that threat, was this comprehensive, coordinated, and uniform and centralized approach to caribou recovery. You know, we've always, across the province, within regions that have caribou, have worked on caribou. We do have existing implementation plans provincially for caribou, but what has been lacking, or what was lacking up until the development of this specific program, was the broad coordination and uniform approach that was needed. We have had staff in individual regions doing work, but often we were competing with each other for resources, whether it was funding or whatever, in order to do work and progress our caribou work. So we removed that by having this centralized program where the funding and the allocation of resources is looked at strategically, and those resources are divided more evenly based on priorities from a strategic or provincial scale. And that's, the second goal, addressing gaps in the old approach, and aggressively pursuing new recovery measures. So, the recovery measures may not be particularly new. We're looking at a lot of the same recovery measures that we would have considered previously, but the big change is the approach of being more strategic about where those measures could apply, setting up the structures and the procedures or policies required to inform where those recovery measures should be occurring. Because of the strong foundation in science, we also have a very robust, we have an internal science team in BC, and we also participate on a joint science team with Canada. One of the other things, that the province wanted to address was really having a robust tracking and reporting process on program management and the recovery measures and outcomes. And so I'll talk about this a little bit later, but there's a lot of work that's been done to get these pieces in place. And this really helps us, in our reporting that we do to the public, but also reporting that we would be doing to other governments like Canada. And obviously, this is also very helpful for, what we anticipate would be in, audits of the program. We really want to show that we are have developed this comprehensive program, and we are making good progress on caribou recovery in the province. So like any, similar to other programs and agencies in the public sector, as well as most private sector businesses that I'm aware of anyway, the Provincial Caribou Recovery Program has developed a strategic framework that falls under the umbrella of a program-specific vision and mission. So our vision is conservation and recovery of British Columbia's caribou through excellence in integrated resource stewardship. And our mission is to lead caribou recovery through a comprehensive, collaborative, and accountable provincial program. We have 4 goals that have been developed. These were developed from the bottom up by our program staff and management, with our primary goal around population and habitat management, specifically to stabilize, recover, and/or maintain identified woodland caribou herds in BC. There are 3 other goals.
You can see sea lion. Wow. Hey, do you have that link?
there are 3 other goals that support the achievement of Goal A, and they revolve around commitments towards community stability and partnership. So again, developing partnerships with Indigenous nations and others who have a common interest in recovering caribou. Knowledge development and dissemination. So this really ties into the science foundation and the Indigenous knowledge foundation of the program to ensure that the structures and processes are in place for effective knowledge dissemination. And as well, program management. So, this is really about this group, this Caribou Recovery Program, the team leading the delivery of the provincial program with integrity and innovation. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these governance kind of slides, but I'm not sure how much everybody knows about how the program is actually set up, but the primary responsibility and leadership for the program itself is with our Resource Stewardship Division, which is down in Victoria.
So I'm just going to interrupt for one quick second. I'm going to mute everybody, so that means you're going to get muted, and then unmute yourself, okay? Just to get rid of some feedback.
I don't know if I can unmute myself, but
okay, well, I can probably unmute you.
Okay, hold on. Yeah, all right, that's fine. Go ahead.
Okay. All right, you're good to unmute your. Okay, perfect. Sorry for interrupting. Continue.
That's okay. Okay, I think I'm good now. All right. So yeah, just to reiterate, the responsibility for the program lies with our Resource Stewardship Division within Flunro. And so this is, many of you will be familiar with Russ LaRoche, David Muter, Darcy Peel. This is the division that our leadership is with, and we take our overall direction from that division and from those folks. The primary, so the program is really divided in terms of delivery between Flunro regional operations in the south area, regional operations in the north area, and then Ministry of Environment. And so it's a dual ministry lead in terms of delivery, and with that ultimate accountability and responsibility from Resource Stewardship Division, but regional ops delivery in the areas. As you can see, there's a number of supporting agencies, and I won't go through them all, but a number of them are quite relevant for us in the Northeast. So the only thing I want to point out here is that we do have a number of program area leads. This committee here called Caribou Program Area Leadership Team. This is about a dozen of us across the province, some of whom are within the Caribou program and some outside of the Caribou program, who have specific leadership roles on specific recovery themes. For example, I am the program area lead provincially for caribou habitat restoration, maternal penning, and conservation breeding. And then my colleagues within the program and outside of the program will have different leadership roles for different tools. You can see above that in the blue box, we have the Caribou Operational Leadership Team. So this is a subset of the broader Caribou Program Area Leadership Team. And this is about 7 or 8 of us that really drive the program forward in terms of building out those the strategic frameworks and identifying the priorities moving forward. The executive director of the program right now is Russ LaRoche. And then we have the Caribou Program Board, which is an assistant deputy minister level committee comprised of Flunro area ADMs. So in the north area, we have Eamon O'Donoghue. And then Ministry of Environment also sits on that committee. And then you can see there's a variety of other committees and that sort of feed into all of this. And you see a link here as well with our caribou science team. This, just really briefly, this is a picture of our team from just over 2 years ago, the last time we were, first and last time we were able to meet in person. What I want to emphasize here is, like, there's maybe 40 people here. This is not a big team in BC. We have a very small provincial team that is basically driving the Caribou Recovery Program forward. It's, you know, I would say quite limited resources. In the Northeast, we have a total of 9 of us, and we're one of the more well-staffed groups around the province. So some of the priorities and commitments related to our Caribou Recovery Program, I know all of you will be familiar. We do have a couple of big agreements that were signed just over a year ago now that have really helped us move forward in terms of caribou recovery, management and actions. We have the bilateral agreement, conservation agreement signed between BC and Canada under Section 11 of the Species at Risk Act. And this includes some high-level commitments to implement recovery measures and explore some other recovery measures for the 33 southern mountain caribou herds. So those are the herds within that gray outline on the map on your right. And then we also have, at the same time, February of 2020, signed off an intergovernmental partnership agreement between BC Canada, West Moberly, and Soto First Nations. And this agreement sets out specific measures and actions for the 6 central group herds of southern mountain caribou. And both of those agreements are currently being implemented. So in terms of you know, some additional priorities and our strategic framework. So 28 out of the 55 herds in BC do already have formal endorsed direction through existing implementation plans. We have the Mountain Caribou Recovery Implementation Plan, the Peace Northern Caribou Plan, and the Boreal Caribou Implementation Plan. However, BC has a requirement to complete herd plans for all of our herds, and these will ultimately replace the existing implementation plans. So herd plans will provide current context and future needs of each of the herds. And I'm not going to say too much more than that because I know Michael is going to dive into that more deeply when we get to his slides. As I mentioned already, we do have a BC science team that is comprised of internal to BC government staff, and we do have a few former BC government caribou bios on that team as well. And there's a BC Canada joint science team that BC participates in. So, you know, under our vision, mission, goals, etc., the program has developed a strategic framework that outlines clear objectives for the variety of management actions and tools that we have available. Basically, we've developed objectives, outcomes, and performance targets for all of the areas that our program covers. And so those really guide what we move forward with in terms of priorities, how we track those priorities, you know, in terms of measuring them, and how we report out. I've already talked a bit about the financial and project reporting, but do note that we do build annual reporting that is available to the public. We are a little behind. We did just release the 18-19 annual report about 6 weeks ago, and we will be producing the 1920 and 2021 reports over the next 3 or 4 months, and so you can keep an eye out for those later in the fall. They will be available to the public. And of course, adaptive management is a key principle for our program. We're always learning, and the whole point is to adapt and adjust as we move forward and learn new things. So I'm going to just provide a really high-level overview of the types of management actions that the program is considering or implementing currently. So under the habitat sort of theme, of course, there's habitat protection. There's a map on your slide here that just shows some existing protections that we have in place already in the Graham caribou herd range to the west of Fort St. John. So we do know we have existing habitat protections on the land base already through a lot of hard work from public servants over the last 20 years. A lot of these protections are in the form of what is referred to as government actions regulation orders. So ungulate winter ranges, wildlife habitat areas. And in the south, we also have some other types of protections that come in under the Land Act and specific reserves under the Land Act. Habitat restoration is a tool that we are, it has started out fairly small in particular herds throughout the province, but we're really in a position where we're ramping this up in a big way. For caribou, we're looking at two types of restoration. For habitat, we're looking at both functional restoration and we're looking at ecological restoration. And that functional restoration is really geared towards linear features and basically blocking those linear features to create behavioral changes of wolves primarily and to sort of break that predation cycle. The ecological restoration, of course, is to bring areas back that are candidates, to bring them back to that pre-disturbed state. So a much longer term type of restoration. But there are a lot of opportunities for this, especially in the Northeast, where we do have a lot of linear features that we can address through that tool. Not going to spend much time. We deal with a lot of, we have major projects on the land base. We also have other transactional type developments and exploration on the land base where mitigations can be identified that, that reduce or minimize the impacts to caribou. And another tool that we're linked into for caribou in particular is offsetting. We've used it previously in the Northeast around some of our major project developments, but this is just a plug, I guess. Ministry of Environment is leading an update to the environmental mitigation policy and procedures provincially and making some changes or sort of fleshing out what the offsetting options could be and what that could look like. Restoration is one of those offsetting tools that we could see going forward in the future and have seen on some of our projects in the Northeast. In terms of population management actions, there are a number of them. We've had ongoing predator management in the form of wolf control or wolf reduction occurring in the Northeast for a number of years, 7 years in the South piece for our central group herds. And then more recently, we've had programs in the Chinchaga, in Arboreal, and the Graham and Pink Mountain. So the last couple of years, this program expanded to other herds in BC, and there's also been a cougar program way down in the Kootenays. Maternal penning is a tool that has been implemented minimally in BC. We've had 2 active mat pens, one in the Clinzay-Za that has been quite successful, and that is led by West Moberly and Soto First Nations. And then another one in the Revelstoke for the North Columbia herd that was not quite as successful. And but we are looking at how this tool could be used for other herds to help in their recovery as well. And the basis of this is to put pregnant cows in a pen enclosure where they are free from predators, and so that their calves can have, the first 4 to 8 weeks in a predator-free environment where there is, there's supplemental feed to make sure that the cows and calves are healthy before they're released back into the wild. Supplemental feeding is a management action that has occurred in only one herd in BC to date, and that's the Kennedy siding, which is part of the central group of caribou. And that particular project has been ongoing for a number of years and has also appeared to have supported the stabilization and recovery of that herd. There's also predator management happening in the Kennedy siding, so teasing apart the actions is difficult, but Doug Hurd and Kathy Zimmerman did recently publish an article related to that supplemental feeding program, so be sure to look that up. Primary prey management is something that the Caribou Recovery Program is looking at in collaboration with the Resource Stewardship Division in areas in particular where predator management has been occurring. We know that while we are seeing an increase in our caribou populations for the most part, there is often a corresponding increase of other ungulates, including moose. So we don't want to, so, you know, this is obviously a pretty big and controversial type of management, and we have not, I'll just say we have not implemented any of this in the Northeast to date, but it is under consideration by the program, and looking at particular ways of, you know, what the circumstances would be where this type of action should be considered. Of course, these actions wouldn't be considered without a whole lot of engagement, and so I don't want to panic anybody about that, but it is a tool in the toolbox. Conservation breeding is another tool that is being considered by the province for the southern group of southern mountain caribou. Conservation breeding is, you know, an augmentation tool where we would need to bring wild caribou into a facility, and they become a breeding stock for all intents and purposes. In BC, because we have you know, such a small number of viable herds in the southern group of southern mountain caribou, it would probably take a number of years to build up a breeding stock if we were to go forward with this. But the idea is that that breeding stock would produce calves, and those calves would be released back into wild herds to supplement them. And so, you know, we wouldn't be putting 8-week-old calves. These would be like, you know, usually anywhere between 1 to 1.5-year-old calves going back into the wild. So huge number of considerations around that program. And this, we've been exploring it now for 2.5 years. And, you know, it's kind of a question mark as to whether BC would go forward with this. However, Parks Canada has recently approved a program to start up in Jasper for designatable Unit 8. And so there's a lot of learnings that we've had through their process and planning, and a really good collaboration going on there. So, and that will continue as we continue to explore our program. All right, that is it for me. Yes.
Oh, I was just going to give you a time check and let you know that we need to get onto Mike, but you're right there, so we're good.
Yeah. Okay. Over to you, Michael.
Hi, everybody. Am I coming through okay?
Yes. Might be a bit of feedback, but maybe it's just me hearing that.
Yeah, I hear it too. Perhaps anybody that I could just politely ask you to mute while I present, and then when we get to the question period, you can open it up. So yeah, thanks, Joel. My name's Michael Huck, as Joel mentioned. I'm working on caribou herd planning within the Northeast. So here's a map that shows the caribou ranges within the Fort St. John timber supply area, which is also the planning area for the Land and Resource Management Plan update. As you can see, there's quite significant overlap. I think just over 50% of the planning area would be considered caribou range. The Chinchaga range, I'll start with the east. I can't, you won't be able to see my mouse moving, but if you could, you'd see that I'm on the eastern side of this image. and there's a purple outline, and that's the Chinchaga Range. So the Chinchaga is a transboundary herd. So these caribou go back and forth between Alberta and BC. It's bounded to the north by the Fontasse River, and to the south, it kind of gets, when you get into the agricultural zone of Fort St. John, that's what kind of limits the range there. And to the west, it's the Beaton River. Moving down to the southwest corner there, you see a blue range. That's the Graham Range. So this is the southern portion of the Northern Rocky Mountains. It's about 100 clicks due west of Fort St. John. So the upper boundary is the Halfway River, and then the eastern extent is the Halfway River as well, and the agricultural areas near Hudson's Hope. And then to the west, the range is bounded by the Ospika watershed. As you can see, this range, it's partially within the Ominika, and then it's partially within the Peace. And then the Pink Mountain subpopulation range is due north of the Graham, and that's in this purple color. So this is, the northern boundary stretches into the Fort Nelson district and is bounded by the Prophet River, which forms the boundary of the Musqueam Caribou Range to the north, and to the south by the Halfway River. And then to the west, there's the Haida land that separates the Peace from the Ominika, and then to the west is the Finlay herd. And then there's some other boreal caribou herds, which their ranges tuck into the planning area, but not to a great extent. So that's kind of, I'll dive into a little bit of a snapshot of what is being undertaken here in these herds, but I just wanted to give that overview to start with. Joelle, can I ask you to go to the next slide, please? So provincial herd plans, these are what herd planning ultimately, this is the end product of what provincial herd planning efforts come to. So within these herd plans, they describe the status of each herd. So that's, you know, is the population growing? Is it stable? Is it decreasing? It also talks about the conservation status of each herd. Then it identifies specific threats to the local population. There's a myriad of threats, and I'll get into some of those later. And as Joel kind of highlighted, beginning of that image with the boreal caribou, you know, there's multiple threats as a result of cumulative effects on the land base. So they also serve as essentially a repository of current knowledge and past management actions, and they'll highlight the goals and objectives for each herd and outline proposed habitat and population management actions required to meet them. So there's not any approved herd plans currently, but once approved, they will guide management implementation, and then they kind of serve as a living document to track decisions and inform ongoing management. I put a shortened URL there. So if you type that into your browser, you'll come to a web page that has an interactive map of all the caribou herd ranges in British Columbia. And if you click on the individual ranges, you'll be able to access the draft herd plans. Yeah, that's all I wanted to kind of say about that right now. But so next slide, please. Okay, so a quick overview of the Chinchaga. So as Joel mentioned before, they're red listed here in BC, and they're on Schedule 1 of the Federal Species at Risk Act. The long-term population trend is decreasing. We just finished surveying the Chinchaga, and the 2021 total minimum count was 166 animals. Of that, 13% were calves, and 29, we had a 29 to 100 calf-cow ratio. So a calf-cow ratio that high is generally seen as a pretty good thing. But the 13% of the total population for calves is something that we'd want to see a little bit more. We want to get that up to 15 or above. That's kind of our renewal target. So this range, some of the key threats are predation, and it's whenever we have a collared animal that's out there on the land base, if it's predated upon, it sends a signal to our biologists, and then they will go out into the bush and they'll make a diagnosis of what killed the animal to the best ability. And what we found through years and years of this kind of monitoring is that it's primarily wolves that are leading the decline of the Chinchaga caribou. The major kind of threats are habitat loss and fragmentation. There's not a lot of industrial development currently happening, but there's a lot of historical development that has taken place within the Chinchaga range, largely from petroleum and natural gas exploration and development and forestry. There's not renewable energy out this way. There's not a lot of recreation pressures. So those kind of are the legacy threats. And we do have ongoing forest operations happening in the region, and as well as petroleum and natural gas operations. So current management, for out of an emergency kind of act, we initiated predator management in 2019, and that's been ongoing since. We also have habitat management. So at the outcome of implementation of the 2010 Boreal Caribou Implementation Plan, wildlife habitat areas, ungulate winter ranges, and resource review areas were established. So wildlife habitat areas and ungulate winter ranges, they're a government action regulation, and they essentially prescribe general wildlife measures for these areas. So what can industry do within these areas? And so we have a mix there of conditional operating areas, and then areas where there's no forest harvesting, no roads. And then from a petroleum and natural gas standpoint, when proponents are going into these areas, they need to meet the requirements set forth through the interim operating procedures for oil and gas within identified boreal caribou habitat. So it's really just mitigation, but it's not formal protection in these areas. We also have resource review areas. So this is a subsurface tenure deferral within portions of core habitat. Another kind of active management measure that's taking place, both being First Nations led or by the province or proponents, is restoration and reclamation. So there's quite a few dormant well sites in these areas, and the oil and gas industry is actively reclaiming some of these in this area. And then restoration, some of our First Nations partners have active planning projects. I don't believe that there's currently any restoration projects happening, but there's plans to do so. So I'll go to the next slide, please. So the current state of herd planning for the Chinchaga is previously we were embarking on a range planning process for all boreal caribou herds at once. But then once the LRMP project was confirmed, we made the decision to lop off, for the lack of better words, the Chinchaga, and pursue collaborative herd planning with interested regional First Nations. So these include Doig River, Blueberry River, and Prophet Rivers First Nation. So we have a table with them. It's been a bit of a slog over the past year or so between COVID, interregnum, and just changing kind of priorities and direction. We haven't been able to really get a whole lot of work done on this, but we have meetings coming up here over the spring to continue that technical planning. The ultimate end goal of that process would to identify habitat and population management recommendations to feed into the herd plan and ultimately lead to an outcome for Chinchaga caribou recovery. The range plan itself is envisioned to be integrated into and then finalized through the LRMP update project. And just to kind of give a sense of what technical planning looks like, on the left there, you'll see just three small images, but it's integrating telemetry data, habitat suitability modeling, disturbance data, and as well as resource constraints, tenure areas, looking at the timber harvesting land base and trying to come up with solutions and spatial scenarios that provide for an outcome to establish targets. So go on to the next slide here. So this is the GRAM. This is blue listed by BC and threatened on Schedule 1 of the Species at Risk Act. The long-term population trend for the GRAM as well is decreasing. In 2021, so this past winter, we had a total minimum count of 144. 70% were calves, and we had a 45 to 100 calf-cow ratio. So this is really promising results. And this is partially attributable to predator management, which was initiated last year. And some of the key threats are predation, primarily wolf, habitat loss and fragmentation. It's a bit different here. In the Omanika side of the GRAM range, there's threats from some mines that are in the EA process currently. Then it's wind power, and then historically this area has been a focus for forestry on the eastern boundaries and the southern boundary, as well as petroleum and natural gas development. So this leads to habitat loss and fragmentation. Current management, as I mentioned, we've been conducting wolf removal in this range. And then there's previously been some planning for the GRAM. It was included in the Peace Northern Caribou Plan. So as a result, there's wildlife habitat areas, ungulate winter ranges, land act withdrawals, and as well as standardized industry management practices. So these are mitigation measures for proponents operating in the area. And there's also, we've completed tactical restoration planning for the GRAM. So it's essentially an inventory of legacy disturbances that is then kind of worked through a system where we look at what you can actually restore because there's no tenure associated with it. People aren't using it for recreation, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just like these are areas that we can restore without having, a threat of ongoing that we're going to be impacting somebody else. So next slide here. So the GRAM is covered by the Southern Mountains Section 11 agreement. We're undertaking an internal process to identify potential management recommendations aligned with established recovery goals and objectives. So this is being led by the science team provincially, and ultimately this will come into the land use planning through recommendations within the GRAM herd plan, and those will be integrated in the Fort St. John Land and Resource Management Plan for the portion of the range that overlaps that planning area. All right, next slide, please. All right, so this is the Pink Mountain. So unlike the other two, Pink Mountain is a special concern on the Species at Risk Act, and they're blue listed in BC. Again, long-term population trend is decreasing. This winter, we surveyed a total minimum count of 374, and we had a promising calf-cow ratio of 29 to 100, and about 17% of the caribou that we spotted were calves. So that's pretty good. Key threats are predation and habitat loss and fragmentation. So the habitat loss, it's not as prevalent within the Pink Mountain. There's been nominal forest harvesting, kind of the petroleum and natural gas development's really been focused on the eastern low elevation portion of the range. Yeah, it's really quite pristine when you get back into the Musqueam Chica, which encompasses a large portion of this range. So we've been we undertook predator management starting in 2019, and that's ongoing. And also recently we established wildlife habitat areas and ungulate winter ranges for stone sheep and mountain caribou within the kind of the northern portion of the Pink Range. And just recently we completed a tactical restoration plan for the Pink. So again, it's just an inventory of available areas that could be restored within the Pink to contribute to caribou recovery. And that is a draft product currently. It was just kind of a project from last fiscal. But I'm looking at the time here. So that's my last slide here. And we'll move into questions. And then hopefully we can have a little bit of a dialogue. Oh, actually, one last thing. Can you go back one slide, sorry? Pink Mountain planning. So recently, the province, we undertook an internal process to draft seasonal core habitat. This is something that you'll notice for a lot of caribou. As you move down and to the west and east is that there's core habitat, which is, these areas that are really important for caribou during different seasons of the year. So we completed that, and that's currently a draft product. And additional planning is required to develop management recommendations. And the pink is kind of, based off the conservation status, we're focusing our planning efforts on the Chinchaga Gram at the moment. But any recommendations that do come out of a subsequent process will be housed within the Pink Mountain Herd Plan and then integrated into the LRMP update project as a result. Okay, that's all I have. And we can move into question period.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael and Joelle. That was a lot of information about caribou. There's a lot of, they can tell these guys are very knowledgeable and have a lot to tell us. We could have kept going probably for a bit longer, made this a bit more long, but we do want to get some questions. So recognizing it's 11:30, the presenters and myself can stay till noon to talk about questions. So whoever can, let's do that. There's quite a few in the chat. Joelle, do you want to stop sharing? Just go stop presenting. Joel's already answered a couple in the chat, trying to get ahead of it. So I think what we should do here is I'll quickly go through a couple that hasn't been, and then when we have time, we can go back to some of the questions. Phelan, the first one that she haven't really talked to yet would be, and Don and Jill, you have a few questions anyway, so why don't you start? The first one I was looking at was your recreation trails one, but why don't you speak to some questions first? It's good.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect. I won't turn on my video because my internet's not great. But yeah, I typed them as we went just so that I wouldn't have to try to remember them all. But I was just curious. I know Recreation Sites and Trails is supporting the process, but they weren't listed as a partner. And I was wondering, or a supporting partner in the...
A supporting agency. I think maybe because they're captured sort of by Flynn Roard, but it's a good point, Donegal, and that slide can certainly be amended to make sure it is explicit. Because you're right, we do have, we have Brian Mitchell, who is Sites and Trails Caribou Program employee, and that program does support the Caribou Recovery Program in general.
Yeah, and I think that one of the management actions is the management of recreation, so I think it's important to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think the other question I had was around, there used to be a stakeholder group within the decision making called the Caribou Progress Board, and I'm just wondering why in the new Caribou Recovery Program there's no such group anymore, or stakeholders are not actually provided that opportunity to review and provide that input.
So that's a great question, and actually so there was back when we still had Chris Ritchie with us, that was one of his tasks, was to create a stakeholder, so kind of an external stakeholder steering committee or advising committee, and that it didn't happen, and I mean, I can't really speak to the whys of that. It might have just been, it didn't get addressed during the time that Chris was still with us because of other pressures, but it is on Darcy's plate right now and he's sort of, he's definitely been thinking about what that would look like, and and that is a committee that I know he's talked about, local governments and MLAs, industry, et cetera, other interests on the land base. So it is on his plate, and I'm sure we'll all hear more about it soon.
Yeah, because the committee did exist with Chris Ritchie when he was in leadership, and yeah, it spoke directly to the minister. We met with them once a year and provided our comments and review on what could be done on the land base. So I think, I'm excited to hear that it's still in the works and hasn't gone away completely, but it's got to be 4 years now or 5 years since the Progress Board met.
Yeah.
And there was very qualified people on that group, and they're just still, I guess, out there wondering why we're not being included in it.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you. I will pass that comment and yours, you know, the support that you're expressing here for that along to Darcy. It is, I mean, it's been, yeah, definitely spoken about as recently as within the last month. So I know it is in the works. And you know, I'll see too, Donegal, if he's able to maybe reach out to you to talk about it.
Sure.
What he's
And then
thinking.
my last question, I know I'm hogging it, was around the maternity pen and the cusp. It wasn't mentioned in your maternity pen discussion. It was my
Right.
it's built and they were expecting to capture this spring, and I'm just wondering if that
Yeah.
happened or.
Yeah, no, it didn't. I put a comment there in the chat. So the project was put on hold this winter due to COVID, which is fine because it, you know, it gives us several more months to really make sure you know, everything's in place for a successful capture and pen operation next year. And right now we're also trying to, you know, in terms of provincial program support, we're trying to, I guess, second Corey Legiboko. He's been requested specifically by the Arrow Lakes Society to support them. And so we're trying to make that happen so that they have, you know, very strong provincial expertise supporting them.
Thanks, Joel.
Yeah.
Thanks. I'm kind of kind of down the list. So we have Rod Garland. Are you still on the line? Did you want to talk about the population level, knowing which one, what number we're looking to recover to?
Oh, yeah, and I put a comment there as well.
Oh,
I don't know if Rod's still on the line, but yeah, go ahead, maybe Rod, if you're still there, and you can ask your question again.
Yeah, no, that's kind of where I thought you would say. I never have heard, you know, I know we never used to have very good population levels known, you know, back in the day. So just wondering how far back we go in having good data, and you know, and to what year are we trying to recover to is more my question.
Yeah, yeah, and there is a lot of, you know, there's a lot of hesitancy to put a number. But in fact, our Caribou Program Board did request the program put numbers for each herd. You know, what I put in the chat there is that for Southern Mountain Caribou and for Boreal Caribou, you know, the goal is self-sustaining. And so, you know, which means that we're not implementing a bunch of management actions like predator management, you know, for them to persist on the land base. In a, you know, in a functional manner. So the science team has put it's kind of a target population range. It does incorporate and consider you know, an indigenous harvest in that as well. But the goal is basically self-sustaining.
Okay, self-sustaining. Let's move on to Scott Ellis. Are you still on as well, talking about the controversial primary prey management tool?
Yeah, it's still on and got the answer. So I'll follow up with Michael Burwash. So fair enough. But on any of these things, we want to make sure that if you're going to go down something that's fairly theoretical and highly controversial, that there's due diligence with stakeholders around that. And so if Michael is the ultimate decision maker, I'm happy to have that conversation with him.
Yeah,
if it's more than that, then you know, again, we don't want these things recklessly thrown around when there's an enormous amount of opposition to that. That one specifically.
Yeah, totally hear what you're saying, Scott. Michael wouldn't be the ultimate decision maker. I think it's like it'd be Jens Lycus as the decision maker. Ultimately, what we're looking at is basically a 3-year process that is basically engagement heavy. So, you know, there's no immediate at least as far as I know, nothing immediate happening around. But it is, it has to be a consideration in particular in areas where we have been undertaking predator management for a long time. So reach out to Michael. Michael, I'm sure, could provide information. I would give you the Caribou Program Director as well, but the name of our new director, is yet to be released. But those would be, you could, I guess, in the meantime, Darcy Peel would be your other contact from the program.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I'm just going to do another quick mute of everybody. So Joelle, when you'll be muted for a minute. And there we go. Another question we have in the chat was one from Dan Rose. Anything working with the low calf survival rate? Dan, do you want to talk? Unmute yourself and talk.
Yeah, no, that's something that seems to pop up quite a bit. To tell you the truth, 15% survival rate is I would think, not a goal. That would be worrisome to me. As a livestock producer that spends a lot of time on nutrition and prolificacy, I would think that, as difficult as it might be worthwhile to find out where that problem is, whether it is the actual pregnancy rate or what's causing these calves. We don't know exactly how calves die because we don't collar very many of them. So what's going on for sure? Because the calves are the future.
Oh, Joelle, you're muted. Joelle, oh, hold on. Sorry. Joelle. There we go.
Sorry, I have way too many screens open and my mouse is just not cooperating today. Great question, Dan, and I totally appreciate that from your perspective as a cattleman. Yeah, there's a lot of different factors around, the calf survival question. Caribou cows do start, they don't start breeding until they're 3, which is a little older than most ungulates. And they tend to, they have single calves. So, as opposed to deer where you often have twins and moose. So there is some differences there. And there has been, historically, and I'm talking 20 years ago, it seemed like, from the data that we had, at least that I can recall from the Northeast, we had fairly high pregnancy rates. 90+%, but that has varied definitely in more recent history. So that could definitely be an issue for some herds. But the calves are super vulnerable. They're just super vulnerable to predation, and they are that first summer, especially, they're very vulnerable, and we can typically lose up to 80% of them in that time frame. Anything to add there, Michael?
No, I think you kind of addressed the main points. It's one of those things where it is a bit of a knowledge gap, just because we don't monitor calf predation very much. It's a lot of the information that comes out of to us is through people out there in the land base that have more intimate knowledge of what's going on out there. But it's so.
Yeah, and I would say the only place where we do have good knowledge is with the Cleanseza, and because they do collar the calves, and they're also looking to put collars on with cameras to help us really hone in on those predation factors.
All right, thanks, guys. I'm going to do one more from the chat, and then we'll take up the hands. I have seen Jim's and Jerry's hands up, so let's take one from Tracy about the Alberta Chimchagua Task Force, and then we'll go to the hands up.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Great presentation. by the way. Lots of useful information. Thank you so much. Yeah, no, my question was just around like the coordination of recovery efforts just between yourselves and Alberta. I know they're currently getting some folks together for the Chinchaga Sub-Regional Task Force. And so, yeah, just wondering if there's been any discussions to date or maybe more discussions once that task force is up and running, just to try to coordinate efforts between the provinces.
Thanks for that question. We do actually have a cross-jurisdictional memorandum of understanding between BC, Alberta, Yukon, and Northwest Territories. I would say it's fairly high level. We do get together, I think we get together quarterly in a meeting. It's really, 1.5 hours every quarter to share information. It spans, everything from, the more strategic pieces around, sharing information around our various agreements, whether it's the Section 11s and other, sharing successes or challenges as well, just to see how the other jurisdictions have been managing some of those things. And then more operationally, we do get together with Alberta at least a couple times a year. And actually, I just had one of my staff flag to me this morning that she'll be reaching out to set up a date for, this spring to connect with our Alberta colleagues. So that'll be our operational meeting, and that'll be around sharing, information on the winter work and the results of that. And, we've talked at length with them about, developing collaborative reports for our that include our cross-jurisdictional herds, the Narroway in the south, Chinchaga, Callander, Bischo. So there is communication going on. It could always probably be better and more often, but it is happening, and I'd definitely be interested in hearing more about the task force.
Thanks, Joel. That's really helpful. I'll be actually on the Chinchaga task force, so I'm going to keep this in mind and just see if there's any opportunities that maybe pop up and see what we can leverage, because I think it's a great idea working between the provinces just to align the goals. So thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Tracy.
Jerry. Oh, you're still on mute.
Oh, no,
No, I'm good. I think I just related to Scott's question. I'm just wondering if anybody from Treaty 8 has a perspective on using primary prey reduction as a management tool. I know it's not happening in the Northeast yet, but I've heard several times it's under consideration. So I'm just wondering if there is a Treaty 8 perspective on that.
I could speak, Joel, just to the conversation that I've had, but I can't speak for Treaty 8 or the individual bands that make up Treaty 8. But at the tables, it's always been communicated to me that the First Nations are not supportive of caribou recovery at the expense of moose. And that's kind of been how the message has been, I've been hearing through engagement with the nations.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's anybody, if we have any of our Treaty 8 colleagues on the call here who want to provide their perspective, but yeah, we've heard similar resistance to the idea as well from the nations that we've talked to.
Okay, can any First Nations want to speak up on that, or we'll go ahead, Jim.
I have my hand up, so I'll speak to two issues. They're both related. Treaty 8 between ourselves and the Crown commits the Crown to provide a goodly supply of fish and game for the support and sustenance of the Indians. Moose are our primary prey species. And we are not capable of meeting our sustenance need at this point in time. We've documented that through community surveys for West Moberly and Soto. So we do not support primary prey reduction for a variety of reasons, but principally the reason is if you go to primary prey reduction, you increase the number of hunters who compete with our members for a resource that's needed to feed our communities. The second thing that I want to comment on is what the population target in the Central Mountain Group is. Sustainability is the first element in that target. But the second element in that target is recovery to the level that the herd population is capable of supporting the hunting of these animals by our members in accordance with their traditional seasonal rounds. So Treaty 8 people hunted caribou at a particular time of year when moose were not necessarily a good prey species. And their need for meat is driven by their population and their diet. It would take probably 4 or 5 caribou to produce the meat equivalent of a moose. So you have to look at the populations of First Nations like Soto and West Moberly in this instance, and then allow them to tell you how large the population needs to be before they would be comfortable within their ethic to begin hunting these animals again. Because we haven't hunted them since the early 1970s.
Thanks, Jim, for bringing that perspective. Really appreciate that and respect that. I didn't put it on the slide I know it's a controversial topic that we don't, provincially, there's not a lot of support for. Totally recognize that. I'm not trying to be controversial today. I'm just putting it out there as information, and that, I'm being transparent that the province is considering this tool, and but it won't be implemented without a whole lot of engagement, and they're looking at basically a 3-year process around this tool, if and when it gets implemented anywhere. So it's not going to happen without people being engaged.
All right, let's go. Josh Hamilton has hand up, and then we'll go back to some questions in the chat. Thanks.
Hello, thank you. Josh Hamilton with the Wild Sheep Society, BC. Some of my main questions, I guess, are around fire, but I think first it's interesting to note lots of where this mapping these caribou herds are. I've been working and living for probably the last 15 years, and I've spent a lot of time from Pink Mountain east through to the Chinchaga area, up the Fontaz and Milliken Murphy, up the 173, or the 73 of the Beaton Park, or Beaton Airport, sorry, through La Prise and Jedney and all those areas. So I've seen lots of caribou and lots of work happening at the same time. I guess one of my questions is there been any, are we at the point now? I mean, we've spent, well, as of next year, you said it was 47 million. And what I guess, well, it seems like we're having some positive results now on the recovery process. And now it's to look at make it sustainable. And are you at the point now where you have done any modeling on habitat areas that maybe fire could be a tool? There's some places where I've been up in Lap and there's not a lot of resources going on at all as far as forestry, oil and gas anymore. And there's still lots of lineal disturbance, but there isn't that winter access. And I wonder if places like that where there isn't much happening, that prescribed fire and other tools can be used to help benefit habitats in lots of ways, as well as in the muskox, chicken, the Pink Mountain area herd, and the Graham herd as well. And then I noticed like the map doesn't cover all that area from Pink Mountain east to say, where the Beaton starts to flow south, and that whole area is not mapped for as caribou habitat. But I mean, like I say, I've seen caribou throughout there over the last 15 years. And then I guess when we look at, opportunities, lots of these areas, especially throughout that area where we're having that low results and the higher predation, we have a lot of vacant trap lines, and those haven't been released to trappers available to register them yet. And so there's a bit of a loss there. And then I don't know if that's not an opportunity, if there's an opportunity for a guardian program to work on predation there. And I think like when we're looking at that calf predation, I think it's sometimes you got to color some of the predators too and see what they're living on. And then it'll give us a better understanding of times of year for mortality. Anyway, that's my main questions, I guess, about modeling with fire to restore habitat and opportunities for either trapper engagement or First Nations trapping.
Wow.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, there's a lot there. So I'll maybe start, and then if I'm off track here, you can let me know. Specific modeling of caribou habitat areas and prescribed fire, I don't believe has been modeled, but we do have a Shiny app model that's been developed for the caribou program that does so where we can do that type of modeling, and that would be something that I can follow up on to see if and how that's possible. And we also have access to the Chief Forester's office, who could probably provide some advice or guidance around how to build a model around that. And prescribed fire in areas where there's been little to no industrial development, I wouldn't say is not possible. And you probably are aware of the internal process to some degree around those prescribed fire applications as they come in. We have our internal, so some of our internal caribou bios are requested to review those applications and provide comment back. That becomes part of that package for the stat decision maker. And I know in the review of applications this year that some of those applications were supported by our caribou team because they, after looking at it, felt it would be very low impact or little impact or no impact to caribou. So yeah, certainly, there's the thought around sort of that natural range of variability on the landscape for, sort of that, the amount of early cereal on the landscape, the amount of young forest or open range, I guess. And I think from a caribou perspective, it would be ideal to, we don't want to put things out of whack in terms of that natural range of variability. So in areas where there isn't that, maybe forest harvesting happening in the MK or other places, that there may be opportunities for prescribed fire to kind of maintain that natural range of variability, because caribou are so sensitive to disturbance, and we do understand in general that what the impact of say a wildfire could be in terms of that early cereal vegetation and attracting moose and all that. That we'd really want to be looking towards that low end of that natural range of variability. So there's usually a range, and I'm just speaking off the top of my head here on that, but I guess all to say that I wouldn't see prescribed fire being completely off the books. The vacant trap line situation, I'd have to follow up with Greg Vandola on that to find out where that process is at. I know that has kind of been underway, or, you know, we thought it was underway for the last 3 or 4 years now, to around those vacant trap lines, and to get more trappers on the land base. So I'll find out where that process is at, and you know, what maybe the next steps are around that. You talked about collaring predators, and I'll just mention a project, and I'm not sure if Scott McNay is on the line or anybody else who has been doing the caribou work in the Cleansay-Za, but Wildlife Infometrics has a proposed project in the Cleansay-Za to collar grizzly bears. And because they do, despite having the MAP pen, and we've had the ongoing aerial predator management, as well as a ground trapping program implemented by the nations, the calf survival is still low, much lower than I guess we'd expect. I believe this year the statistic that Scott shared was 14%. And we're looking, you know, kind of for about 15-16% for a stable population. And so there's a project proposed to collar grizzly bears, to use camera collars, and to really, and I think this is getting at maybe one of Jim Little's questions too in the chat, that you know, they really want to look at this, you know, the alternative predator scenario here. You know, when you remove a predator from a system, to the degree that we have, you know, you can almost certainly expect other predators, whether large carnivores or mesocarnivores, so your wolverines, for example, or coyotes even. We're looking at coyotes in some places in the province. They'll move into that niche. And so, you know, that is a risk, and that is a bit of an unknown. And so totally recognize that other predators are on the landscape and they are predating on caribou. Do we know to what extent? Do we know that, you know, all wolverines or all grizzly bears are predating on caribou? We don't know that. And, you know, some of the expert thinking is that, at least around grizzly bears, is it's probably not all grizzly bears. And, you know, when we're talking about species like grizzly bear and wolverine, they're both species at risk in BC. So, you know, it's a you know, slightly different conversation when we're talking about that. But, you know, that said, there are ways, I think, that, you know, if we do have evidence that, say, for example, grizzly bears are a big problem in the Cleansay-Za, specifically based on the study that Wildlife Infometrics is hoping to get off the ground, then there probably are solutions to managing that you know, that would be led by the nations, would be my expectation. And whether it's, you know, and so, you know, I think that those things are yet to be seen, but certainly it's recognized that those things may be an issue. Did I answer all your questions, Josh?
No, yeah, you did. No, that was very good. Thanks. Yeah, no, I was just trying to understand what part of the process I guess we're at now and what the forecast for the future is. You know,
right.
I think kind of circling back to the trapping is that when you have a trap line established, somebody's managing that trap line, right? And they're managing it it's in their best interest to manage it for all species. So they can maintain a balance of, say, wolves to coyotes to other species as well. Obviously, they can't manage grizzly bears, but it gives you that direct insight into the area. And I think it'd be it's a key piece in the habitat restoration as far as maintaining balance. Thanks.
Thanks, Joelle. That was very lots of questions in there that you did hit. There are still questions in the chat that we're not going to probably get time to today. So what we'll do is, if you have an email from the signing in and you've left the question that we haven't really addressed, Michael and Joelle and I will try and send an email out to those. I've captured them, copied them over. So I think with that, we're going to sign off for today. And thanks, Joelle and Michael, for their presentations and being able to answer all these questions. I realize there is still more, but we could probably have lots more for these guys. Thanks for participating, everybody, and making it very interactive.
Thank you very much, Shayla, for organizing, and thanks everybody for participating, and to Michael for helping present.
Thank you.
Yeah. We'll see everybody in 2 more weeks.